For centuries under the Zhou Dynasty, warfare in China was an aristocratic sport. Small groups of noblemen rode into battle on horse-drawn chariots, fighting highly ritualized skirmishes governed by strict etiquette. But as the population exploded and conflicts bled into the rugged, uneven terrain of the south, managing a two-wheeled vehicle over rough ground became impractical. The old aristocratic methods stopped working. States abandoned their elite officer corps and began drafting hundreds of thousands of peasant foot soldiers. Armies grew massive, and casualties in a single campaign could suddenly approach 500,000 men. This sheer scale of violence broke the old social contract. Rulers realized they could no longer manage a brutal, high-capacity war machine using a decentralized network of entitled aristocrats. Facing the threat of total annihilation, regional lords issued desperate calls for new strategies of governance. This open market for statecraft spawned a massive intellectual boom known as the 100 Schools of Thought. Out of this chaotic marketplace, two competing models emerged. On one side was Confucianism, relying on moral virtue and strict social hierarchies. On the other was legalism, a system driven by calculated, ruthless mechanics. These regional rulers weren't looking for abstract philosophy. They were choosing an operating system for their state, trying to figure out which set of rules could best extract wealth and military might from their populations to ensure their survival. The core pitch of Confucianism was that the state should operate like an extended family. It relied entirely on the moral virtue of the ruler and the strong personal relationships between government officials to keep society functioning. Economically, informal moral contracts create a massive free rider problem. Without direct, measurable rewards for specific efforts, individuals naturally slack off. And because officials were selected by personal reputation, high-ranking positions were quickly monopolized by wealthy, well-connected families. A society built on the assumption that human beings will always choose virtue over self-interest might sound noble, but it created an inefficient, vulnerable state. It was completely unequipped to survive the meat grinder of the Warring States period. The legalist school took the exact opposite approach. They assume human nature is inherently selfish. To them, a successful state relies on building strict formal institutions that actively exploit that selfishness. This cold, mechanical architecture was installed in the historically backward state of Qin by a radical reformer named Shang. Shang immediately abolished all aristocratic privilege. Under his new code, power and status could no longer be inherited by blood. Every citizen had to earn their rank through direct, measurable output. If a peasant wanted wealth or land, they had to go to the battlefield and physically cut off the head of an enemy soldier. By tying social mobility exclusively to state-sanctioned violence, Shang took the selfish ambition of the average citizen and pointed it directly at the survival needs of the empire. To enforce this system, Shang divided the entire population into strict blocks of 10 families. If one person in that block broke the law and the others failed to report it, all 10 families faced severe punishment. The state effectively outsourced its surveillance network to the citizens themselves. This chart maps reservation utility, a person's baseline level of happiness and freedom. The state intentionally suppressed this baseline by heavily restricting commerce and alternate careers, driving up the motivation to fight or farm just to survive. With merchants heavily taxed and intellectual pursuits banned, farming and fighting became the absolute only paths to a decent life. The entire population was funneled into maximum productivity. Shang's reforms deeply offended the old aristocracy. After his royal patron died, those disenfranchised nobles had him executed by tying him to chariots and tearing him apart. But the new king kept his entire system intact. Legalism transformed the state of Qin into a highly optimized, centralized war machine. Over the next century, that machine systematically ground down its rivals. It conquered the remaining regional powers and fully unified China under a single empire. Qin's ultimate victory proved that legalism was a highly effective engine for consolidating state power, but it was completely devoid of humanity. Running an entire society on a purely transactional, high-pressure incentive system generates massive societal friction. The laws were merciless, and citizens faced extreme punishments for the smallest infractions. The breaking point came when a group of conscripted peasants were delayed by heavy rain on their way to a military post. Knowing the Qin Code mandated the death penalty for arriving late, they realized they were dead either way. They had absolutely nothing left to lose by revolting. That initial spark ignited rebellions across the country. An operating system built entirely on extreme punishments and zero baseline utility will eventually cannibalize itself. Just 15 years after unifying China, the Qin Dynasty collapsed. The succeeding Han Dynasty absorbed the brutal lessons of the previous century. They recognized legalism's institutional strength was required to run an empire, but Confucianism's moral persuasion was necessary to keep citizens from tearing it down. They developed a hybrid solution, a structure often described as a Confucian exterior covering a legalist core. This system utilized the cold, hard incentives and strict metrics needed to make the state engine run, but it masked those mechanics beneath a warm, patriarchal narrative of moral duty. It kept the peace while maintaining state capacity. Whether organizing an ancient empire or a modern corporation, true statecraft requires a deliberate balance between ruthless operational mechanics and humanistic narratives.